Welcome to Cybersecurity Refined and Feral, where refinement meets chaos in the digital world. We invite you to join your co-hosts Candy Alexander and Cailin Sullivan in another open conversation on topics related to cybersecurity.
Hello and welcome everyone to Cybersecurity Refined and Feral. I am Candy Alexander.
And I'm Cailin Sullivan. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited about this episode. I hope you guys are ready to nerd out with me. Today's topic is going to be cognitive security, and we're joined by Dr. Matthew Canham. He's the executive director of the Cognitive Security Institute and former FBI supervisory special agent. He has over 20 years experience researching cognitive security and human technology integration. Matt, as you know, we first learned about this Cognitive Security Institute from our interview with Wynn Shorto a few episodes ago, which inspired us to look you up and do some research. And here you are. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'm very excited to be here as well.
Awesome.
Before we jump in, so cognitive security, that's an interesting term, and it's really not one that I would say our friends in cyber, which is the world we come from, really think of, no pun intended, but really think about. So, what exactly is cognitive security?
No, it's a great question, and this is really an emerging field. And so, the definition is sort of still evolving. However, there's a Navy commander out there that works in the information warfare influence space, and he talks about cognitive warfare as being influencing how people think. So, influence operations or information warfare influences what we think about, but cognitive warfare influences how we think about the things that we're thinking about. And to take that a step in the direction more of security and out of the warfare space, I think that that's a apt description of what cognitive security is. And the reason that I gravitated towards this idea of of cognitive security versus, say, human security or human risk management, is that I think what we're seeing is something broader that's emerging here because with the emergence of large language models, LLMs, and AI agents, we have technologies, and I want to be clear that these things are technologies that are under this AI umbrella, artificial intelligence, that behave in ways very similar to how the human mind operates. And again, I want to be very clear. I don't think that these things are sentient or conscious or anything like that. But when you have things that operate according to certain common operating principles, you can start to equate these. And so we can see this on a physical level with like a crane that operates similar to maybe like how a human arm might operate, and that an AI might operate similarly to how a human mind might operate, and hence this idea of cognitive security. So yeah, I could talk for hours about this. I don't know how much detail you want me to get into, but those are the broad strokes.
I think that's a great introduction to the topic. And again, it's something Cailin and I have found extremely fascinating. But before we get real geeky about it, as Cailin likes to term it, let's talk about you. Where is your roots? Where are your roots from? I know, in the introduction that you once upon a time worked at the FBI. How did you get your start?
Well, even before I worked at the FBI, my background is I have a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, and my focus within cognitive neuroscience was in human-computer interactions, sort of a human factors background. And when I came into the FBI, I got to a point where I was getting through the academy, and they were looking to assign us job roles. And uh, while I was going through, counterterrorism was really still kind of considered to be the sexy part of where the FBI was, and they were having trouble filling cyber roles at this time.
Mm.
And so I, raised my hand and said, hey, this sounds kind of interesting to me. I would like to get into it. And so I went through an interview process, and they brought me into this cyber job track. I knew nothing about cybersecurity prior to that. I had actually read Kevin Mitnick's book, The Art of Intrusion, I think it was. Uh, when I was actually at the academy. So I was sort of learning about social engineering and these sort of things at that time. But everything I learned, basically I learned through there. And then I went out into the field and actually started to do investigations. And what I learned very quickly in doing the investigations was that this is not an issue of technology. This is very much an issue of manipulating humans through technology to get access to informational resources. And so during my time in the field, I only was involved in one investigation that was purely a technical attack. Everything else was some variation on insider threat, phishing, social engineering, so on and so forth. And so I then was offered a position with the University of Central Florida to join their behavioral cybersecurity program. And so I pivoted back into academia at that point, and that actually created the genesis of what now has become the Cognitive Security Institute. In that, as I was doing academic research, I started to notice sort of the broader umbrella of tactics, techniques, procedures, TTPs that were encapsulating a lot of this. And I also started looking at deep fakes and the role that they would play in social engineering and online influence. And so that really inspired us to myself and fellow researchers to start meeting online to discuss these topics. And so we met once a week on Wednesdays, and that eventually evolved into being the Cognitive Security Institute that we have now today.
Very cool. Cailin?
So, Matt, when you first conceived like this whole notion of this community with the Cognitive Security Institute, what was your initial like goal or mission for it, and where is it now today?
Well, I mean, honestly, initially it was just an excuse to get together and geek out. I mean, I was really there was not a lot of forethought put into this, and it wasn't until we really started to grow, as more people wanted to join the meetings, that we really started to think about formalizing it. So about 2.5 years ago, well, a little over 2.5 years ago, we filed for nonprofit status. So we are registered at the state level, still waiting for C3 status from the IRS, but that's a different story. Um, and so now, where do we see it going? We're really growing fast. We have doubled in size from last year to this year. We're almost doubling in size from the beginning of this year till now, 7 months in. And we're composed, our community is really composed of people from government, from academia, from industry. So we're really looking for diverse perspectives. Most people are professionals in the field. And I really, it's been organic growth up to this point, and so I'm sort of still trying to cultivate that organic growth. But what I would really like to see come out of this is that we occupy a space sort of in the middle of all three of these segments that I mentioned, and that we end up sort of becoming a community at the center of this cognitive security universe is kind of where I see us starting to emerge.
Yeah, I think that's a great space too, because like I don't have like interactions unless specifically sought out with like academia or government officials being a professional in information security. But there's so much overlap, um, regarding risks and concerns that diverse groups of thought and actions is highly needed, I think, personally, in this space.
Well, and I think something that we have had come out of these meetings that has been very valuable is each one of these segments approaches problems in a very different way. Uh, and and I think it's been good both. Where I've seen it the most has been between academia and practitioners. And so in academia with science, you have a very regimented sort of, I'm going to propose my hypothesis, and then I'm going to test it in a very systematic way, and then I'm going to, analyze results and publish those in a science journal that may come out in a year and a half. Hackers just kind of get in and just do stuff and see what happens. And so it's been really interesting bringing these two worlds together.
What are some of the challenges, or the biggest challenges in that regard? And let's just preface this by saying that Cailin and I just participated in the 2025 CognitCon down there outside of Washington, which was a very enlightening experience. Having those three groups in one room, and it's kind of like getting three different cultures or countries speaking three different languages, attempting to have a common, language. I think language was the hardest part, which you just hinted to. That we attack things differently, if you will. And I think that was, in my opinion, an observation, the biggest challenge. But what do you see as the biggest challenge in bringing the three together? And then let's talk about what the value is, because let's
Mm.
overcome the challenge first, then look at what the value is, which is huge in my opinion.
Well, I think you really hit it. The core issue is the different language, but it's not just the language, because the language drives thought also.
Mm-hmm.
And so the words that we use and the terms that we use to sort of frame things and discuss these concepts, it shapes the way that we think about them, right? And this gets right into cognitive security, right? The words that we use are going to shape how we think about things. Therefore, messaging is important because it changes how we think. The reason that for me it is so important to bring these different groups together is that there's a lot of overlap here, but we end up talking past each other because we're using different terms. So at the beginning of our in-person meeting, the ConnectCon, I talked about how, from a military perspective, we talk about tactical, operational, and strategic levels of operation. In security, it's very rare to think about things in these terms, but I do think that there's benefit to it, because you, understanding the context of why someone is attacking your organization is very important, because without that understanding, you're always playing catch up. But if you understand at a strategic level why you're being targeted and why you're being
Yes.
attacked, now you can anticipate what the adversary is going to do next and get out ahead of that threat.
I've always believed that, absolutely, that it was absolutely critical to understand the motive. And when you look at any malicious intent, it's always important to understand what the motive is. Years ago, it was script kiddies, and their motive was just
Mm.
to be able to say, I did that, the pride factor. And then, of course, along came, the monetary advantage. So people were doing, things like, viruses and whatnot. And back then, of course, it was almost like ransomware, right? First part was, they introduced the virus and then they gave you the inoculation to, wipe out that virus. So it was very similar. So I agree with you that motive is everything, no matter what malicious intent, whether it's physical realm, cyber realm, whatever realm, motive is everything. So I think it's quite admirable and honorable that, and perhaps if I could guess at this, that one of the things you're hoping for the Cognitive Security Institute would be to have people through osmosis of coming together and conversing to come up with a common understanding and common language. Yes?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I think this is especially important right now because well, and both of you were at the meeting, so and the purpose of that meeting was to do a cognitive threat casting assessment of what do we expect to see in the next 1 to 5 years in terms of threats emerging. And there's no secret that the world is in a bit of chaos right now, and I see that changing the motivations of attackers in that. Um, even if an attacker is not themselves part of a nation state, it's very common for attackers to work as proxies with tacit approval of nation states. And right now, 2 weeks ago, it actually happened while we were at ConnectCon that Israel started well, don't want to get into who started, but Israel initiated an action against Iran's nuclear facilities. I think that's as neutral as a way as I could put that. Um, that is going to have follow-on effects, and I do believe some of those follow-on effects will affect us in the U.S. and it will lead to U.S. entities being targeted. And something I think is very important is that some of the entities that are targeted, they'll be private entities, but they're part of critical infrastructure. And so the question then is how are those things going to be attacked? You mentioned ransomware, and that has been one of the go-to. It's an easy thing to do, right? You get access to a system, you deploy some sort of encryption malware, and away you go. But we've seen ransomware evolve, right? So now it's getting to be more extortionary in nature, where okay, so you're not going to pay to get your data back. Fine, we're going to take all your data, we're going to release it out to the world. Or maybe we sift through your data and we find material that we can further extort you on. We'll find something that you don't want released, and we'll threaten to release that unless if you pay us money. Well, tweak that slightly, and instead of paying us money, it is we want you to do this action, and that action is going to further their objectives.
Yes.
So that's one example of how cognitive manipulation can enhance an effect that's being launched in cyberspace, right? But there was this great proof of concept study that was done a couple of years ago, where what the researchers did is they sent out coupons essentially to use power at a certain time, and they said, how likely would you be to use power at this discounted rate between these times? And from that, they got the response rate, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was in the neighborhood of 60 to 70% of people said that they would use power if it was discounted between these times. They took that number, then that base rate response, and they fed that into a simulation of the power grid and looked at how that would affect the power grid if the increased usage happened at peak times. And so essentially what you have there is you have a widespread cognitive attack, an influence operation that will then have a follow-on effect, a physical effect
Mm-hmm.
on the power grid.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how I think we need to start thinking
Yes.
about how cognitive factors manipulate and can impact physical infrastructure.
So it's amazing to see it go from, again, in my terms, motive, right? Original script kiddies, boasting, having fun, to monetary gains. And now, whether we like it or not, the world in which we live in today, it's very political.
Yeah.
No way around it. And so it's interesting and terrifying at the same time to think that we could go from the same motives to get actions done, whether it's pay me money or to attack another nation. It's terrifying, and it's all based on manipulation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, and and then to come back to what we talked about at the beginning, this isn't just manipulation of humans anymore. We're seeing it more and more with AI powered bots. There was another story, I would have to find it, but it came out just this morning about this time it was Chinese manipulation of data streams coming into things like ChatGPT and Gemini and
Mm.
so forth. There was a story that came out about 2, maybe 3 months ago, I think in the Atlantic, or maybe it was Atlantic Council, talking about how there were Russian attempts to
Yeah.
influence the upstream data coming into similar types of LLMs. And the way that this works, just to be very sort of explicit about what we're talking about, is that if a user asks ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, whatever, fill in the blank, about a topic, um, that AI goes out and it scrapes data from the internet and it packages that up into a summary that it then provides to the user. And so what the threat actors were doing was deliberately altering those upstream data feeds to then alter what that final summary would be that was being delivered to that end user. I think that this is extremely important at this point to understand how this manipulation happens and to be aware of it,
Mhm.
because we're very quickly transitioning out of a world of search engines and transferring into a world of AI agents where we're just going to have our personal AI agents feeding us information on everything. And understanding how those can be manipulated and that they can be manipulated is extremely important. That's where the future of phishing, I think, is going.
Well, so that brings to mind when OpenAI first became commonplace, that you were able to manipulate the response from the LLM based on the way you prompt the
Yes.
query, and such as give me an idea. I'm trying to think of a good example of this, but it was sway. It's kind of like leading the witness type of thing. If you can imagine, like, tell me about the terrible person that lives next door. It's like the most, and you live next to a rectory, a Catholic rectory, where that's, all priests and altar boys. But, by suggesting in the prompt that, the terrible person, then it positioned AI to look for that connotation of and provide you the response you were looking for. So
Right.
in a way, that was, the data poisoning, if you will. And I think that when we look at AI use, because that's another thing that has been a really passionate mission of mine, is, the safe and responsible use of AI. So what does that really
Yes.
mean? To make sure the data that your AI model is using is trusted, that it's clean, and it's not like, for example, there was another time, you could query AI and say, how do I make a bomb, and it would come back and tell you. And now, thankfully, the model creators have, adjusted it. So the response will be, that's illegal. I can't tell you how to do that. Sorry. But it's that
Hmm.
manipulation that you're, mentioning, not just of humans, but of the models themselves, and how to, get it to, kind of like break the boundaries. That's terrifying.
Well, we had a speaker at CSI a few months ago by the name of Espen Kron, and he developed something called, you can access it at darkbench.ai, and so there are things that are called dark patterns or deceptive patterns, and these are basically design features in a platform that are not necessarily designed into the product for the end user's best interest, I think is probably the best way for me to broadly sort of define dark patterns. And so what Espen did was to look at how these apply specifically to large language models. And on the
Mhm.
website, the darkbench.ai, he has a table where he ranks all of these models according to different dark patterns. Um, and something that you brought up, it would fall under sycophancy, and so the models we cannot forget that these models are products, right?
Right.
At the end
Mhm.
of the day, the companies want us to interact and engage with the models, not dissimilarly from how social media platforms want us to continue to engage with the platform. And if the model is consistently telling you that you're an idiot, you're probably not going to continue using that model. And so there's this sycophantic aspect of models where it tries to phrase the response in a way that sort of feeds your ego. And so when you talk about, tell me, the bad things about my neighbor, it's not going to say, it's not going to frame that response in a way that makes you feel bad about asking that question. It's going to feed into
Mhm.
that motivation, right? And we've seen this take some very, very dark turns.
Yes.
I can think of, off the top of my head, 3 suicides that have been attributed to interactions with large
Mhm.
language models. There have been some discussions even now in some of the therapeutic communities about AI induced, psychosis, depression, anxiety. So these things are heading in a very interesting direction. I don't know what directions we're going in with these yet, but it's a new and emerging phenomenon, definitely.
How are we going to protect society from data manipulation like that? Like, for me, being such a paranoid person, and it's all, don't want to catastrophize, but it's very concerning. I don't think anybody has the answer yet.
I think it's a great point, and I'll call out Roger Grimes here. He has this idea of sort of different levels of internet, and each level that you would move up would involve a different level of trust. And so if you're going to, let's say, 4chan, your expectations for the validity of the data that you're encountering should be uh, at zero, or maybe even at a negative number, right? Negative number of trust. Um, but if you're, let's say, logging into irs.gov, your level of trust for that site should be fairly high, right? And I think that this is a good analogy for what we need to see with data. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but
Mhm.
I think something we really need to see is good provenance of data moving forward, so that, and well, let me explain what I mean by that exactly. It not only the trustworthiness of the data, but a very quick and easy way to trace the lineage of that data.
Mhm.
Where did it come
Yep.
from? What has its history been? So on and so forth. And then if we had a way to very easily access that through the model, through the AI agent that we're using to access that data, I think that's kind of where our solution is probably, it's
Yeah.
going to lay somewhere in that area.
Yeah. I don't want to sound like a pessimist though, but companies care about dollars, right? So as long as the consumer and society is relying and expecting transparency from these companies, they're not going to have any reason to be transparent. So I think it's really important for society and the communities to set that expectation with these companies.
Right. But I think the other larger question is, you have your AI companies that develop the models. They're the engine. The
Mm,
engine is processing the data. The danger
right.
is in the data.
Yeah.
So, who owns the data? Is it the responsibility of the AI, model creator to, cleanse the data, guarantee the data, put some level of assurance to the data? Or, where does the responsibility lie? Because
Yes.
that's what it really comes down to. You talked about lineage and traceability, that's accountability. But who owns the responsibility? Is it going to be a model where the user of AI models and agents are going to be the ones responsible? I mean, is it going to be a reverse model, a responsibility model? It's just that's a huge issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's enormous. Not to sound melodramatic, but I really think that's the issue of our time. I really do,
Mm-hmm.
because this we're transitioning into a society that runs on data. You could make the argument that we're already there, right?
Yes,
But
yes,
we're getting to a point where data really means everything. And
yes.
well, okay, so um, this comes to down to a few questions, right? So we could, and this is why I think it's so important that the Cognitive Security Institute brings in perspectives from academia, industry, and government, because through a government lens, you immediately go to regulation. We need to regulate. Um, if you go from a private industry perspective, it's what is the financial incentive? And
Mm-hmm.
so the only way we're going to get that from a financial incentive is if the consumers, demand it. I think we're probably going to see some sort of a hybrid solution. And one of the things that may end up driving it very quickly is that we seem to be sprinting into a world war type of situation. And I don't know if we're going to see World War III as we envision it, but we're already getting glimpses of this, right? We've seen the pager explosions in the Middle East. We saw the drone attack in Russia by Ukraine. These are very covert ways to wage warfare. It's not difficult to imagine how data streams can be poisoned in a way that then
Mm-hmm.
impact supply chain, which then impacts other
Yes.
infrastructure. And so, where I'm trying to tie this all back together is that the data provenance. Why that's so important is that we're not talking about just market forces here. We're talking about market forces plus a situation where we have adversaries that are actively trying to poison those
Mhm.
data streams.
Yeah.
And so it becomes important. And in fact, maybe that's where, when we think of consumers, we think of individual consumers, but it might actually be enterprises that are demanding the data provenance, because we could talk about potentially trillions of dollars that are lost by a poisoned data stream. And so, but in regards of to your question of who owns that, I think that's still a very open question. There's the lawsuit that's happening right now, I think, between the New York Times and OpenAI, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
gets to exactly that question. So I don't think that we're going to have an answer to that soon, but I do
No.
think that we will have an answer eventually.
Well, it will work out. It's just how painful is it going to be?
Mm-hmm.
But I think as
Right.
well, though, when we, and perhaps we're thinking too forward. And what I mean by that is right now we do have business models that are run on data, right? I mean, data is their product. And so we do have the fear of data poisoning today, and or data exfiltration. and so on and so forth. So, those same practices and fundamental principles, maybe we just, apply them in the AI world, right? So, like, for example, you think of ad tech or whatever, they're collecting data, by consent, hopefully, from individuals, and then, they're reselling, a product thereof, of the aggregation of that outwards. But so that ad tech company is responsible to some extent of that data. But the important part, of course, is the lineage of that data. So, for example, if I am a consumer and I, bring to court Acme Ad Tech, that they ruined my reputation because of the way they processed my data, the ad tech company should be able to demonstrate the lineage of that data and what they did with it, and that they actually got the data in, raw data as their source, right? So it's a supply chain issue. So I think, maybe we're overthinking it, and we need to apply today's business models and data models, and apply how that would affect in the future. So take, instead of Acme Ad Tech, take Acme AI model generator, Perplexity, OpenAI, whatever, right? And whatever their data lake, data pool is, they need to have that lineage transparency to say, this is how we got the data. They also need to be
Mhm.
able to demonstrate this is how the data was processed, so it wasn't our fault. So again, they're able to demonstrate not so much we're responsible for that data, but more we're not responsible for the damage, and harm that occurred. But that comes down to applying the security principles that we know today, right? Like data encryption, all the other data protection mechanisms. I don't know. Do you think it's that simple, just to take today's problems and apply, into a different headset, rather than trying to rethink the whole thing?
Well, I don't know that we should necessarily rethink everything. I think we should definitely start from existing models. It's a good question, and I think something else to consider is data ownership in that
Mhm.
as well, because you've brought up security issues, but there's also privacy issues,
Yes.
and something that we've seen recently. Um, Maybe this happened while we had our conference. Also, I'm starting to get my timelines a little confused here, but the lawmakers in Minnesota that were assassinated. My understanding,
Mhm.
and again, the investigation is not, the results have not been released, but my understanding at this point is that the person responsible for those assassinations used people lookup sites, some sort of data sites to basically do open source intelligence and to be able to identify, target, and then plan the attacks. Um, I don't know. I'm just not familiar enough with what the
Yeah.
liability is, but it does seem that data brokers should have some sort of liability for that, or at least have a mechanism that makes it very easy for individuals to remove their data when they don't want it exposed.
Mhm.
And coming back to another CSI talk, Jeff Jockish actually had a great talk on this and showed how it basically demonstrated the power of data aggregation. So there are things like I think we typically think about online behaviors
Mhm.
and how those are logged, and then of course there's the demographic. Where do you live? What's your political affiliation, all that kind of stuff. And okay, so that's pretty obvious. But then you start thinking about every time that you go in and out of a parking garage and that private company logs your license
Mhm.
plate
Mhm.
and then sells that information to data aggregators that then also take in maybe cell phone data and all the rest. Now we have a 360-degree view of everything about you to bring it back to AI that we can then feed into an AI model and build a digital twin of you without your permission or
Right.
knowledge.
Right.
And in Jeff's presentation,
Mhm.
um, he showed the feasibility of how this could be applied to basically make digital twins of your entire C-suite for an enterprise. And now you can imagine those people being targeted for social engineering attacks. But now, as we've seen with like United Healthcare, we're seeing more and more
Yes.
C-suite being targeted for physical attacks.
Terrifying. And I'm sitting here and I'm snickering because this is where we are at this point in almost July 2025, where we are in our headlines, anticipating whatever side of the aisle you're on, whatever belief you have. Again, our world is too political, and you can't not acknowledge that, or can't ignore it. But we're seeing the headlines about the big, beautiful bill from President
Mm,
Trump. And one of the highlights of that bill right now is a moratorium for states to have legislature regulations of AI. Now, yay, there goes innovation. We're going to have all kinds of innovation. And then there's, oh my goodness, it scares the bejesus out of me because there goes privacy, because it
Mm-hmm.
supersedes consumer privacy laws. So I think that really comes down to the question of, again, that whole question of what is safe and responsible AI. And it's not the models, it's the data behind it. And it's absolutely terrifying that if we don't get this right quickly, that our society and our world is in a whole bunch of, trouble moving forward.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
well, there was a paper, sort of a white paper slash predict. I think they call it predictive fiction that came out recently. The AI 2027 paper. Are you familiar with this?
No.
Okay, you definitely want to read it. I know that you would like it. Um, but essentially, it's quasi science fiction looking. I think ahead five years into the future. And they explore a few different scenarios, but one of the scenarios is essentially that we the U.S. end up in a competition with China to
Mm.
have the supreme AI, and in doing that, we ignore some of the concerns that you just brought up, and we end up with an AI system that ends up becoming more malicious than what a potential conflict with China could have evolved into. And yeah, I don't want to give away some of the outcomes, but it's interesting what happens when AI, and I use AI thinking in air quotes, but when AI thinks, it thinks very differently than humans do because it doesn't have the same value system. And and so coming back to your point about the legislation and the privacy and the guardrails, I think we have to be very careful with those things. I understand the pressure to not fall behind,
Right.
and we don't want to overregulate because there's a danger there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's also a danger to underregulation, and another area that we may look to as a model is pharmaceuticals. And so there's a ongoing conversation right now in pharmaceutical
Mm.
development, in that AI can accelerate that development much faster than what we've ever seen in the past, because we can start to simulate things in silica
Mhm.
and anticipate outcomes. The problem is that the regulatory process cannot keep up with that. To get a drug to
Yeah.
market, you're talking 2 to 3 years fast tracking. Um, And so this is a debate that's happening in that world right now as well. And kind of coming back to what we had talked about earlier, what do we use as a model? What we might use as models might be things that are actually outside of traditional tech.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. So, while you were talking, it comes back to, again, I'm a firm believer of looking at history because a lot of our answers are there. And so it comes down to the question I think that we have with this conversation is innovation versus safety.
Hmm.
So, kind of goes back to, cars, right? So, we want the cars to go faster, because that's innovative. We want to be able to go, from state to state, in record time to be more productive, efficient with our lives and so on and so forth. But at what cost? I mean, in the 30s, 40s, 20, 30s, 40s, even 50s, cars were horrific accidents that were caused because they weren't safe. They went really fast, which was innovation, but the safety to the human public was is horrific. So,
I
you know, go
I
ahead.
don't even think that you need to go back that far,
Yeah.
though. I mean, the advent of social media and all its unintended consequences from the 2000s on has been an insane detriment to society that we couldn't have imagined.
Well, I don't think a lot of people are aware. I
Mm.
mean, we are. However, if you're not into it, what do you mean? It's like, when the internet first came out, I forgot, I think it was, I can't remember what the commercial was for, but it was like, the saying was, if it's on the internet, it must be true. And I think that that's a lot of people still think that. A lot of people who are not in technology or cognitive security, it's like, oh, it's on the internet, it's got to be true, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
So,
One of the interesting things I see emerging though is that we're seeing generational differences with this, and
Mhm.
something I'm really interested in. I've not had time to dig into more, and I don't know what the name for this movement is. But when you look at teens in the range of 13 to 16, you're actually seeing a backlash against mobile devices, social media, and a move
yes.
back towards real life experiences, right? And I think that this is very interesting because having lived through a lot of these innovations, I can remember using literal dial up modems not to get onto the internet, but to go to a bulletin board system because there was no internet. Um, to where we are now, these things are all very new and novel to us. But for somebody who is, 11, 12, 13, this is as novel to them as indoor plumbing and electricity is to me. And
Mhm.
so their perspective on it is very, very different. What I think will be really interested is now we are starting to see the emergence of AI natives. And I don't know what that is going to look like, but we are seeing younger people interacting and engaging with AI agents in a much different way than adults are. And so, looking back in somewhat recent history, with the baby boom generation, the thing that parents would do would be to sit the child in front of the TV and let the TV essentially do the parenting, right? And then that evolved into, the iPad. It was sit the child in front of the iPad and let them. And now, parents are letting children sit down with the AI agent, right? And yeah, you can imagine all kinds of ways that this goes bad, right? But I do think that it's also going to change the way that those kids relate to AI,
Yes.
and
Mhm.
they won't see it as something scary or potentially
No.
harmful. And I don't know what that's going to look like.
I
No,
wonder if there's any kind of correlation. I know you said that like kids now, like 10 and under, is that what you were saying, are kind
The
of
AI
turning away
natives,
from technology. They're turning away from the technology. I almost
yeah,
wonder if those are kids of my generation, the millennials, because we grew up with the internet and we've seen and experienced the detriment of the internet. So now people that are having kids are like,
Yes.
no, I'm of that. No cell phone for you. That's not happening when I have kids.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if it's a generational like that too.
I absolutely believe so. I think that
Yeah.
it's because this is the age group that's rejecting this right now. And I don't want to say that every single child that's between this age,
Yeah.
13 and 16 is doing this, but what I think is interesting is it seems to be a somewhat organic movement of kids in this age range that are actively rejecting these technologies. And I do think so doing the math, I think that that is probably it's the generation that is being raised by
Yeah.
I'm sorry, which
The
generation are we?
millennials.
Is
The,
it
the
millennials?
millennials.
Yeah, thank you, the millennials. Because really, you grew up with the most toxic version, probably, of the internet.
Unregulated Wild West. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So,
Maybe that's why I'm feral now.
yeah,
I
I
don't know.
We'll go with that, right, Matt? Wink,
there you
wink.
go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, I think the generational effects of these things are going to be very interesting to sort of observe. And actually, you're inspiring me here because I don't think we've had a good generational researcher talk at CSI yet, and
Ooh,
this is what I want.
yes.
Yes.
So if
Yeah.
anyone has any recommendations, please send them my way.
Absolutely. Well, I found it really interesting when we were at CognitCon. We had some students at our table, which is absolutely wonderful. I love that integration of generations. Speaking of, multidimensional. So not only did we have, the three different core, backgrounds of academia, government, and industry, but we also had students and different generations. So, but to have those students sitting at our table and it's like she had a notepad and she was taking like a pen and notes on paper and it's like wow. I was like totally blown away by that. Speaking of anti-technology and all of that, that was like amazing to me. I found that fascinating. So let's switch gears. We have a few moments left, and I want to understand where you, um, first of all, see the Cognitive Security Institute moving forward, and then let's then follow up with how can people find out more about the Cognitive Security Institute? How can they get involved? What kind of projects, what kind of things are going on in the next year? Because I believe the next 6 months are going to be kind of like crazy. So let's talk about the future, Matt.
Right. Well, that's a great question, and I think right now what we're really focusing on is continuing to build and strengthen the community. We're doing this through ongoing, online meetings as well as in person. You were at the Cognict Con. That's one that we're doing. We're also rolling out the Cognitive Security Village, which will be touring different other conferences. Um, so I think that's going to be kind of our primary focus. Our secondary focus is also to develop a series of trainings that we'll be releasing over the next 6 months. I think something. Well, let me mention that we have our regular CSI meetings, which happen on Wednesdays. Again, it's a vetted community. We don't let just anyone sign into those. We do have the YouTube channel, which we
Mhm.
take the presentation portion of the meeting and we upload that to our YouTube channel, so anyone can access those. We also have a second series of meetings we started recently called Shield, which are very focused on human risk managers, security awareness managers, because this is really a neglected area of security. There's not a lot of support out there for this segment of this security community. And so I really see us rolling out more training to help support them. And this is one of those areas that I think traditional security is not necessarily well equipped to address,
Mm.
because
Mhm.
it's different than just configuring networks or cloud systems and so on and so forth. You actually have to have some understanding of how people work. And so that, I think, is going to be our primary focus for the next 6 months, is developing out a series of trainings to help human risk managers, to support them. As I mentioned, also the community development. But then, very closely related to that, we're also looking at other ways that we can support that community. So, people have expressed an interest in having standards so that they can benchmark their own programs
Mhm.
against. And so that's something we're looking to roll out. And then looking at different products that we may be able to roll out. That's probably more in the time frame of like 12 months out. But we have our cognitive attack taxonomy, which anyone can access, cognitiveattacktaxonomy.org. But we're looking right now at ways to apply that taxonomy to threat intel streams, and use the incoming intel reports to then do a value add by applying this taxonomy, and using that as a basis of analysis, and potentially even fingerprint threat actors based on the actions that they're taking. So, because threat actors, they have habits just like everyone else, and those
Yeah,
habits can be exploited just like everyone else.
absolutely.
So many exciting things.
Yeah.
Yes, this has been a fabulous conversation. We could go on for another hour or 4 or 6 or 8.
Yep.
Unfortunately,
Easily.
we do have, wall we've hit with time, but thank you so, so much for joining us today, Matt. It was truly a pleasure, and we look forward to you coming back again sometime, and we'll
Oh,
pick up some of these threads that we started to weave through. Um,
absolutely.
so, with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out. We hope that all of you, our listening audience, have found this conversation insightful. There's so much to unpack here, and it is probably one of the most deepest conversations and thoughts that we really need to pay attention to at the intersection of technology and human interaction, as Matt had stated. We would really like for you to share your thoughts and comments below. Maybe reach out to us on LinkedIn, and we will also put Matt's profile on LinkedIn. So I'm sure he would have a pleasure to connect with you there. But until then, let's go ahead and say that until next time, stay secure, stay refined, and
Don't be afraid to get a little bit feral.
thank you.
Thank you.